I'm Chelsea. I am the relationship manager for the Fractional Community. I work with RecWorks. We are a tech recruitment firm. So if anyone knows of anyone hiring, please let me know. And today we've got a lunch and learn with Jon. So Jon is the founder and CEO of the Scale Factory. So Jon, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chelsea. Yeah, thanks for making some time to I guess give up your lunch break to come and listen to me. Hopefully this will be enlightening. If you haven't been enlightened by the end of the session today, then I'm more than happy to have one-on-one conversations where there's more enlightenment to be shared. I'm sort of expecting that today we are mostly CTOs. If we've got any non-CTOs, CEOs, CFOs in the room, then do shout, and I will I'll tailor a little bit to the other audience. But my expectation is that you're largely a CTO community. That on the screen up there is the QR code is my LinkedIn profile. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, then please do that. And if you'd like to drop your LinkedIn details in the meeting chat to connect with me and others, do feel free to do that as well. So today we're going to really briefly, like, what is AWS, right? So I'm expecting that many of you sort of have some idea of what we're talking about here, but just to sort of fill in some gaps for anybody else, we'll talk about that. And then I guess the bulk of today, what I wanted to cover is if you've literally just started a fractional gig, and the business that you're starting with is an AWS using business. What the hell do you do, right? What are the first steps to take to kind of orient yourself to understand what's going on and to figure out whether there's anything lurking nastily to surprise you. And then we'll talk a little bit about what to do after that. I think that the first week or so is going to be pretty key in a new engagement, but we'll talk a little bit about the things that follow that as well, and also how to get help with some of those things as well. So we'll talk about some quick wins, we'll talk about some long-term wins, and we'll talk about how you can get some help with that as well. So very briefly, from a CTO perspective, you probably know this, but the AWS platform, it's an on-demand cloud computing platform, right? So it's a platform on which your clients might be running their applications. It's got the largest market share of all the cloud providers. There are people like Azure and GCP sort of following up the rear, but AWS was the first, really. So they had that sort of first mover advantage, which does mean that bits of it are slightly annoying, whereas the other clouds were able to fix that based on the learnings from AWS. But we won't be talking about the other clouds today, if not for no reason other than the fact I don't know anything about them. I haven't touched the other clouds at all. This T-shirt is my certified AWS T-shirt from reInvent 2016. I actually ran up my first EC2 instance on AWS in 2006, I think it was, when it was first available. So I've been doing this a little while. It's a subsidiary of Amazon. You might have heard of them, that little bookshop down the road where you can buy your things. And it's pretty complex as an environment. There are over 200 services covering a range of types of service, including compute, storage, and database, which you would typically expect to need to be using if you're building an application, but also content delivery, analytics, machine learning, AI, which is the thing that they're making the most noise about at the moment, as is everybody else, and then the security, identity, and compliance tooling as well. So there's quite a lot there. It's quite complicated. Pretty much, if you're building an application in the cloud, AWS has the bits that you need to be able to do that quickly and efficiently. And those services are spread across 33 regions in total, so pretty worldwide coverage. Not everything is in every region, but most things are in most places. There are some slightly weird regions as well. So if you're building stuff on AWS, you're probably using one of the European or the US regions. There are also regions in China which are very unique in that they contain a bunch of different services. You can imagine that a lot of the cryptography doesn't work quite as well there as it does in the European regions. And there's also some government-specific regions of AWS as well, which you might need to be targeting if you're building for either the US government or an EU government entity. And typically, when you're building on AWS, you'll either have one AWS account with all of your resources in, which isn't good practice today, actually, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Or you might have a slightly more complex environment where there are multiple AWS accounts, and so you need to sort of figure out which of those environments you're working in as you start with your new client, so that you can make good choices. From a billing perspective, if we have any CFOs in the room, billing is done monthly and it's based on usage. So as you use resources in the cloud, that usage is totaled up throughout the month, and then you're sent a bill, typically sort of a few days into the new month when they do some reconciliation of that data. And you can either pay for it on a credit card or a debit card, in fact, and the payment is taken out straight away. Or you can pay by invoice if you've set up that relationship with AWS, and these are these are be relevant if you some of you are working with early stage businesses. Some of these sort of choices, design choices, and administrative choices may not have been made yet, and so it's worth understanding whether your client is billing on credit card or invoice, because there's action to take in both cases. So you've just landed in a new gig. That you'll have a load of stuff you don't know. Like the cloud platform is one of many things that you won't know about your new client's application, operation, business, and so forth. And so as a fractional individual, you're going to be spending some amount of time figuring out what's there and prioritizing, like working out what to do next. This isn't your only concern. When I say you should do this in the first week, that's only in an ideal world. You may choose not to if you're busier with other things. Typically, fractional consulting is it's a consulting gig, and often you're brought in with a very specific agenda in mind. So these might not all be things that your customers are aware of, but that you maybe will need to highlight later on. And my view is that if you're an executive in a technology business, your goal should be to get to the point where you can sleep at night, right? And sleeping well at night for me is about everything being under control. The things are well understood, and everything's working, and you know that everything's working. And if you've come from a sort of a well-established business, you might be used to this. You might be used to the idea that everything's working okay, but not every platform is like this. And certainly in the sort of earlier stages of a business, such as those where they might be hiring a fractional CTO to look after some things, there will be a gap between where they are today and where they need to be for you to be able to sleep well at night. So let's talk about how we get you there. So for me, the conditions for restful sleep in a cloud environment are that you've got some degree of single sign-on user management. Everybody's got only the privileges that they need and no more than that. The architecture has been built securely and efficiently, using infrastructure as code tools, and is patched regularly where that's necessary. You've got governance in place to make sure that developers can't create expensive resources or make stupid security mistakes that leak your secrets to the world. And in the case that something bad like that does happen, you've got alerting on that, and you will know if your platform is struggling in some way, whether that's through availability, security, or if there are cost anomalies. In the event of one of those alerts going off, you've got well-practiced incident management and disaster recovery processes. You've got backups, they're working and tested, you know how to reapply them, that sort of thing. And the knowledge is distributed. The knowledge about how to do this stuff is distributed across your teams. It's written down, it's socialized into the organization. You don't have just one guy where everything's in their head. And because that is often a problem. If you've read the Phoenix Project, we're talking about the Brent here. Do try and avoid the Brents. And you've got trusted parties you can call on for help. So if you can hit all of these requirements or all of these conditions, I think you can sleep pretty soundly as a CTO. But you're not going to get here all at once. And almost certainly as you walk into a business, most of this will probably not be true, particularly at an earlier stage. So the question is, where do we start? Amazon has a framework they call the well-architected framework, and it covers 6 pillars on the screen now. It's a set of fairly prescriptive guidance from AWS, written up as a sort of capture of knowledge from AWS solutions architects and also AWS partner solutions architects like my team. the guidance is pretty solid stuff. And so a lot of what we're talking about today is going to be sort of based on the things that you'll find in the well-architected guidance. And it's definitely something that's worth looking at. It actually applies even if you're not using AWS. You can apply some of the questions in the well-architected tool to a non-AWS platform. In fact, I think Azure have their own well-architected framework as well, and it looks a lot like the Amazon one with the serial numbers filed off, or at least it did when I first looked at it. And we've run, my team's run about 700 of these reviews of platforms over the years, so we're pretty conversant with it. We know what people tend to get wrong, or the mistakes that people regularly make, and so some of my guidance here is based on knowing that some of these things you won't have done because most businesses don't. And I'm going to highlight, I think, in particular, the security and cost optimization pillars, because A, that's what I said I'd be talking about today. But B, I think unless you explicitly know about other issues as you come into a new fractional gig, then these are probably the things you should be looking at. Like it might be that you've been invited in and you've been told, performance is terrible. We don't know, we can't service our customers at peak times or whatever, in which case, fine, go look at performance as a priority. But in all other things being equal, you should want to be happy that the security and the cost optimization stuff has been taken care of. So in week one of your engagement, and let's take this loosely, right? You've got other priorities as well, but early in your engagement, I would prioritize these things. Initially, let's look at access, right? You've just taken over a CTO role, let's say. First of all, let's make sure that the last guy doesn't still have access, right? If there's a CTO before you who's no longer there, let's make sure that they can't get into the platform. But they may well have left on friendly terms. They may very well have not left on friendly terms. But let's make sure that that's the case. So let's shut them out. So disable any accounts that are specifically theirs. Also make sure they can't access email accounts, and we'll talk about why in a second. For every account that you've got in AWS, let's rotate the root passwords. Let's just go and change those, because A, that's a good way of knowing which accounts you've got where, and B, that gives you some comfort that those passwords are now new. That anybody who's taken copies of those from anywhere can't get in. You'll also need to enable multi-factor authentication on root accounts if that's not already set up. The console will have been yelling at you for weeks to do that if that's not done, but it is important to do that. Nowadays, with an AWS, you can add multiple MFA tokens to a single root account. And so if you've got a sort of shared responsibility set up where maybe the root account password is known by a couple of key people in the business, but you each have your own MFA token, that's a good way of securing those accounts. But for the most part, you shouldn't be using the root account. That's a break glass emergency only account. But let's make sure that those are rotated and you've got MFA set up. And whilst you're there, have a look at the other accounts that are set up, user accounts inside your AWS account, and disable things that are not used or that you don't recognize. Ask questions of your team why they're there. It's good to just have a sweep out of older identities where possible. Also give you a feel of what other stuff is in there. I think logging is a thing that's worth setting up early as well. There are two things to look at here. AWS CloudTrail is a log that you enable per region of every API activity that is made against the AWS platform. And so anybody who's making change, whether that's with Terraform or with a console or with a CLI tool, that gets logged into that CloudTrail. So if CloudTrail is not enabled, really important to turn it on, because if something goes wrong, that's how you're going to find out where that security mishap came from. And enabling guard duty is a good idea as well. Guard duty watches for things that are anomalous happening. My favorite example of guard duty, we were working with a customer who was building a payment provider platform with a team based in the UK, but they were selling to a bank in Singapore, and the CTO got on a plane and flew to Singapore to go and go talk to the customer. And when he got to Singapore, he logged into his AWS account, and guard duty lit up like a Christmas tree because Simon wasn't usually logging into his account from Singapore, and so that was weird. So that gave him an incident to look into. And guard duty covers all sorts of things as well. So very good to set up if you're in there. And we'll probably throw some false positives initially, but definitely we'll let you know of things that are weird going on, particularly stuff like known botnet traffic or activity that looks like Bitcoin mining or other things that can result from security incursion. Guard Duty will let you know about that. You should also, and this is where the sort of email address thing comes in, and this is a thing that's often overlooked. Go and make sure that the name, address, phone number, and email address associated with your AWS accounts is correct. And the reason why this is important is if you fuck up and you can't get at your root account anymore, the password recovery mechanisms use that phone number and that email address. So if these accounts are things that were set up a long time ago while the company was still being built in a garage or a co-working space and it's now moved into their own offices or whatever, if it's very likely that these details are wrong. So while you're there, go have a look at that. It's an important step. And the other thing that it's worth doing is to make sure you know who your Amazon contacts are. Every account within AWS has an account manager assigned to it. You may not have spoken to them. And if your spend isn't particularly high or you're not showing signs of substantial growth, then your account manager will be covering 1,000, 2,000 accounts potentially. But as you get bigger, as your spend increases, as you grow, as you sort of show signs of being a more consumptive AWS customer, you'll get account managers with fewer and fewer accounts, all the way up to enterprises. We work with ITV. They've got at least one account manager looking after exclusively them. Most of our customers, their account managers look after about 30 accounts or something like that. And it's important to know who your account manager is because they can help you get at other parts of the business. They can help you get at if you've got problems to solve, either administrative or technical. Your account manager will be your first port of call. So try and find out who that is. If you don't know who that is because they haven't introduced themselves to your business or whatever, you can get in touch with me and I will find the account manager for you. All I need to know is the name of the business and the URL of your business website, and I will be able to route out an account manager that way and put you in touch. They are always worth knowing before you need help. When you need help is too late. The other thing to look at in your first week or in the first period of time there is what services have been exposed to the internet, right? As a provider of application services, it's important that some things are publicly accessible, right? You probably have load balancers that can be seen by the rest of the world because that's where your traffic hits. But if the team you've inherited have made some bad choices in design and architecture, you might find that there are publicly accessible S3 buckets waiting to leak your data, that there might be services running in public subnets. One thing I've seen fairly frequently in younger businesses is databases running in a public subnet because the developer couldn't work out how to connect to the database to manipulate data if it wasn't accessible to them, and that's not a good sign, particularly for those databases where the access control is a bit weak. So have a look at that, and if you find anything that's public that shouldn't be, that's a smell, and you should probably have a think about correcting that in some fashion. Also, in your first period of time, if you're running applications on EC2 instances rather than in containers and so forth, make sure that they're patching. Like, have a look at what the patch schedule looks like. Get someone to show you how they're patched. In an ideal world, you've automated that. There are tools on Amazon for doing that, but patching is a sort of eating your vegetables kind of activity that a lot of people are terrible at. And so it's worth understanding whether the team you've just inherited are part of that thing. Yes, I'll share the slides in the Slack channel, Mark, when we're done. No problem. If you're running containers or you're running serverless, then you're still building using other people's software dependencies, and so you need to make sure that those are well up to date. That can be easier than patching EC2 instances. You can use tools like Sneak and Dependabot and other things to let you know when that needs doing, and sometimes automate the updates as well. But make sure that's being done as well. If you're not patching regularly, something's going to screw you. Like there's no two ways about it. Most of the high-profile security incidents that you've heard about over the last decade or more, most of those are down to out-of-date versions of software being exploited in known ways by bad actors. So there's no real excuse if you're building software using other people's components, you've got to keep them up to date. No sympathy if you get owned as a result of not having done that. So that's the security considerations. Let's look at cost, because that's the other area I've suggested that you might be wanting to look at when you first start. Have a look and see whether you're paying by card or you're paying by invoice. Like that's I mentioned you can do either. If you're paying by card, make sure that the credit card is owned by somebody in the business. That's another mistake. Somebody leaving an outgoing CTO takes their credit card offline, and now you can't use your cloud resources anymore. So do check on that. Ideally, move over to invoicing instead. That's a conversation you can have with your account manager. It's easy enough to do. And if you are paying by invoice, check with the FD and make sure that he's paying that bill. Because if you are not able to serve your clients because the FD doesn't know what this Amazon thing is and isn't interested in paying them on time, then you're going to look a bit stupid. It's also a good signal as you start with a new business as to whether or not they're in financial trouble, because companies generally keep paying their Amazon bill until they're really in the shit. And so that might be useful to you to understand whether you're going to get paid at the end of the month as well. So do check on that as you start. You should also become familiar with what your bills usually look like. Cost Explorer in the console will let you understand what historical spend was for that organization. Get an idea of general trends. Is it sort of creeping up? Is it creeping down? Was there a big jump at some point? Can someone explain that to you? The other good side effect of looking in Cost Explorer is it gives you another good angle on what's running in those accounts. Cost Explorer is sort of broken down by service type, so you can see how much database you're using, how much EC2, whether there's some Redshift. There's a good argument to be said for understanding your infrastructure through the cost. Follow the money as a starting point. And understand whether or not you've got any savings plans or reservations in place. Understand what discounts they're providing and over how long. Often businesses don't know that those are a thing. Don't go setting them up right now. That's often a bad thing to do without knowing what's going on. But making sure that you understand what's there is a good first port of call, because that'll impact on your bill as well. You may be aware that AWS provides funding to businesses to help with getting set up on the platform. Anything that you're doing with AWS where you're about to start a new piece of work that's going to appreciably increase your Amazon spend, there's probably a credit program available to offset the cost of some of that. Some of those credit programs are only available through partners like my business. Some of them are available direct from AWS. So talk to your account manager as a first port of call and understand what the credit landscape has been so far. If you're funded by one of a particular set of venture funds, you'll have access to AWS Activate, which are startup credits essentially. And the Activate program can pay out six figures in credits. I was working with one business a couple of years ago who hadn't realized they were eligible for this over time, and they got, I don't know, 200 grand or something of credits, which was really helpful to them at that particular time, because it was just as we were going into COVID and they were a retail oriented business. So do find out whether you're eligible for that. That's the sort of thing that my team can help you negotiate and sort of figure out. The credit funding programs are ever changing and run by lots of different teams within AWS, and so it can be difficult for even account managers to know what is and isn't available. We can help figure that out for you. So don't leave money on the table. Equally though, don't get used to the idea that Amazon's going to pay for everything for you. I often have conversations with CTOs who are, how can you help us get some credits from AWS because we just think we deserve some, and the answer is, well, have you tried X and Y thing? And if you have tried that X and Y thing and there are still no credits, suck it up. You should be making money and paying for your own cloud bill at some point, right? The credit funding programs are designed to help you onto the platform and to take the risk out of trying new things. If you tried those new things and they haven't led you to be making revenues, then maybe you've got a different problem to solve. Maybe fire a JavaScript developer or two if you're looking at money being tight. I say that facetiously, but they're quite expensive. There are definitely definitely other ways of making your cloud bill look insignificant on your balance sheet, and most of them involve making more money, which is what we're there for in the first place. Operations is the next area that I would be sort of interested in starting at a new business. I would like to watch a deployment happen in a new business. Like, show me how code gets from someone's raised a ticket or starts working on a ticket and now it's in production. How long does it take? What steps are involved? How much of that is manual? How prone to error is that? In an ideal world, you'd measure that on a regular basis, and track your what I think you might have referred to as DORA metrics. It's definitely worth understanding how change is made, and not just software change, but infrastructure change as well. Like if you need to resize something, or I don't know, change some config in a load balancer or whatever. Like, how does that happen? Can you see that taking place, and who's involved, who has to sign it off? Very instructive. And if you can't do this quickly, you will definitely want to be doing that quickly within a month or two, because that will be holding you back from doing the other things that you need to do. So that's your kind of like your first. I've just dropped into a new business. I'm going to go look at all those things. Hopefully useful. I think it's not regularly the case that you walk into a new business, and so it's not necessarily the case that you'll have had to think about these things. But hopefully that's of use. So let's think about what's next, right? When you've been there for a little while, once you've stemmed the bleeding of anything awful that you found, like what are the next steps really? And again, I'll caveat this with saying you have other priorities as well, right? Don't just listen to me and do just these things in the cloud. That they have to solve business problems. But I'll try and walk through what business problems we're addressing by doing some of these things. So within the 90-day period, and again, take that with a pinch of salt, at some point is what I'm saying, in the kind of medium term. I think what you ought to be doing is establishing a landing zone. And I've got a longer slide deck about what a landing zone is and why you should have one. But essentially, it is good practice to run resources in multiple accounts. So rather than just having test, dev, staging, production, etc., all in one AWS account, it is better practice to have separate accounts for each of those. And in fact, in some cases, separate accounts for per developer, a separate account for your security tooling, a separate account for your CI tooling. And you might be, if you're sort of familiar enough with AWS that you know where all the pieces are, you might be listening to me going, that's really complicated. What the hell are you talking about? But in fact, a well-established landing zone makes all of that really easy, and will centralize how you administrate all of those accounts as well. So a good landing zone is a well-architected self-service multi-account provision AWS environment. When I say self-service, what I mean is people in your business, if they need an account, they can go press a button and get an account. And it's got all the governance applied to it that you need it to have, so they can play safely, knowing that they're following the standards that you've laid down for them. So a good landing zone has an account and network structure, and the details of that will vary depending on your compliance regime or the type of business you're in and so forth. We'll have identity and access services, so your users will have just one identity that allows them to drop into whichever accounts they need to work within. It'll apply a security baseline and some guardrails. So one great example is, we're selling product to Germany, and so all of our resources should be in the Frankfurt region, and that's the only place I want to see any of my data. Let's lock out every other region in the world so that nobody can, by accident or on purpose, put data in somewhere that isn't Germany. And that's a really common use case. Also guardrails, cost guardrails. So developers spinning up a big, fat, expensive GPU cluster to mess about with some AI tooling, and then forgetting that they're there, that can be a fairly expensive kick in the wallet at the end of the month. Putting some cost guardrails in means that maybe people can't start those resources without getting special exemption for doing so. Maybe it's just an alarm. You find out about it if those sorts of things are set up. So applying all those kind of policies in code means that you can sleep soundly because you know that the system is stopping people from doing stupid or expensive things. Not all stupid things, stupidity is a constant you can't completely correct for, but certainly from a security perspective. Self-service, so setting up a landing zone. I've got a slide on that later, Mark, which is basically a pitch for me doing it for you. We can get a landing zone set up with all this good practice in a couple of weeks. But if teams doing it themselves, it varies. It's one of those things that is so infrequently done that it doesn't make sense for your developers to learn how to do it because they only do it once per business. It's really good professional services engagement, probably the best example of that in the AWS landscape.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks, Jon.
Cool. All centralized management, so all from one console, various bits of AWS service to allow you to look across multiple accounts and see the security landscape or the performance landscape, the cost landscape. Logging and monitoring is all set up by default, so those CloudTrail resources and those guard duty setups, they're just set up as you create a new account. And in some cases, you might create application blueprints or account blueprints. So in a larger business, let's say you want to permit teams to use a Kubernetes infrastructure as provisioned by EKS, you can create an EKS blueprint that as they create an account, it will also deploy EKS into. They don't have to worry about that. We see this in the SaaS world quite a lot. Using a blueprint for the sum total of your application. If you're selling that application to users who need to see a unique deployment of that software in an account that is only theirs, using application blueprints and a control tower landing zone like that is a really good way of provisioning those new accounts as and when those customers buy. So there's some great stuff in there. As I say, I've got a deck on control tower. I did an in-person control tower day last year. What I need to do actually is sit down and record that content. If you're interested in seeing that, ping me on the Slack, and I will use that as an impetus to actually sit down and record that deck for future consumption. This is the kind of thing it looks like. It looks fairly complicated. In reality, it's quite straightforward. It's fairly undifferentiated. Most customers end up with something that looks a bit like this. Ultimately, all your management is kept central. All of your test and pre-production accounts have a different set of rules applied to them than the production accounts. Every developer has their own sandbox to play in. Backups will go into their own accounts. There's a load of good stuff in there. If you're using AWS today in any appreciable sense, and you are not using control tower and a landing zone, I think that's a mistake. That's my position on this stuff. And so if you are today working with a business that doesn't have one, or in future you find that you're working with a business where this doesn't exist, then do get in touch, because I think it's an important step in governance and management. And in particular, you can get about 50% of the way through the technical requirements for ISO 27001 by doing this. So if you're going for a compliance position, then a lot of the good practices that you need to implement for information security compliance with ISO 27001, you get with this solution. Within your first 90 days, maybe time to look at reducing costs a little more. I think in the initial period, we were talking about understanding costs. I think you need to understand before you can reduce. Otherwise, you just start turning shit off and things start working. But within the sort of your 90-day period or your medium-term horizon, you should probably look at reducing costs. And that's shutting down things that aren't being used. It's right-sizing things that are not being used enough. So databases that have been over provisioned. Developers fucking love throwing huge databases at problems because they can't tune queries properly. And actually, if you can tune a couple of queries and reduce the size of your database server, you're probably going to save quite a lot of money. So that's a good place to look. If you've got log data or file data from customers or whatever, there's it's likely that you're not expiring that data if you haven't thought about it. So you might have requirements under a compliance regime to keep logs for 7 years or something, but you don't need to keep logs for 7 years in highly available S3 storage. You can punt them off into Glacier or somewhere else and sort of do that on an automated basis. So there can be a lot of money to be saved by expiring old data if you haven't thought along those lines. Data transfer between availability zones within one region can cost you money, and if you make certain design choices, you can reduce the data transfer that you're doing across AZs or between regions. That can save a lot of money as well. One big thing that we see customers occasionally do to their benefit is to turn off dev environments outside of office hours. If nobody's working on that platform, why is it on? And you can get a significant percentage saving by going down to either zero or sort of small in a pre-production environment. So do think about that. How you do that in terms of automation is a kind of open question. I was talking to a guy the other day who's founded a SaaS business where they're doing that. So you just plug it in and you can set up schedules and stuff for that. Pretty cool. There are other ways of doing that as well. The key thing is making sure that people can turn it back on again when they need, particularly if you're working crunch hours towards the end of a deadline, all of a sudden your dev environment goes down, you'll be quite upset about it. So you need to sort of think carefully about the approach you use there. For workloads that you understand and know, where traffic is fairly predictable, user behavior is fairly predictable, and it's likely to stay that for multiple years, then savings plans and instance reservations and those sorts of things are a good bet. But you're essentially there then handing over money to AWS to commit to a certain spend over a period of time, and as a result, you get a discount on the actual spend. It's easy to make mistakes doing that and committing to things that you then stop using next year, and then you can't use that reservation. And so it's worth talking to experts about how to think about that before you go down that route. Otherwise, you might end up in trouble. And if you are spending more than $500,000 a year, or you're a public sector business, and for Amazon, that also includes businesses that sell to the public sector, like information systems for schools and that's hospital data platforms and that sort of thing, $250K in that case. If you're spending those numbers, your account manager will happily talk to you about something called enterprise discount plan or private pricing agreements, where you can negotiate certain discounted rates with AWS for certain types of resource over a certain amount of time in exchange for a commitment. So again, if you know that your spend is going to be a certain amount over a certain amount of time, then there are discounts to be had. That includes bandwidth, compute, storage. It's all sort of up for grabs and discussion. Again, it's something that needs negotiating. Unless you know how to negotiate that or what levers are available to pull, you might not get a great deal. But again, that's where partners can help with figuring that out on your behalf. You should also be thinking, if you've walked into a world where everything's running on instances like EC2 instances, or you've got databases running on EC2 instances, typically the types of things that happen if you've lifted and shifted a migration out of a data center, or you've built an application 5 or more years ago, you should probably be thinking about modernizing some of those things. Things that run on EC2 instances can often be put in containers or be turned into serverless applications. And that improves the way that you deliver software. It can make things a bit more efficient. It can help you standardize on a single kind of CI approach, and it can prevent you from having to patch EC2 instances yourself as well. So it's both a sort of a performance, a security, and a productivity gain by looking into that stuff. There are funding programs with AWS for doing modernization work like that, and we can help you negotiate your way through those. So if you're currently running EC2 instances and sort of traditional databases, it's worth having a conversation about whether or not you could get away from that. But again, will this solve a business problem for me, right? If today you're not patching anything and your CI is terrible and you're often dropping things on the floor when you're doing releases, going down this route unlocks a load of things that allow you to improve that practice, and AWS can help pay for some of those things as well. So the last section I've said we'll cover is getting help, and obviously the reason I'm doing this is that I'm a vendor of help. The Scale Factory is a consulting partner at AWS. There's about 30 of us. We're a small business, and last year we were awarded the Partner of the Year award by AWS for our work with SaaS businesses. We've worked with a number of names that you'd recognize. You can see Sneak on there and ITV, probably names that you recognize if you're in the UK. And more than that, besides, we work with I think something like 100 or so businesses over the last 3 years on these types of AWS challenges. So ultimately, I'd like to be the first person you call when you get into a business where there is some AWS. Right, that's where I want to be. And in order to sweeten that offer, we're offering discount rates to people who are part of this fractional community and other fractional communities besides that. We're still figuring out the details of that. What essentially these are going to be percentage discounts on some of the things that we can do, varied by type of project. And you'll have the opportunity to either pass that discount on to your clients as a sweetener for, thanks for engaging me, I can get this a little cheaper, or take it as a referral fee if you want to do that. So that'll be entirely up to you how transparent you are with your clients about that. But we'd like to offer you the opportunity to work with us for a little less money, or for a kickback, because we know that fractional CTOs move around, and we've worked with a handful of people in this community who have regularly moved to new businesses and have called us for help beyond that. And it's always a pleasure to work with the same people in different businesses. You can essentially phone me up and say, the thing we did last time, can we do it again? And it sort of short circuits the whole process. So do get in touch if we can do any of this for you. One of the things that you might consider doing is engaging us to do the review activity, as I was talking about at the beginning of the webinar. So looking into in depth things like cost and security. We can do what we call a focused review, which is literally just an hour on a Zoom call with the right people. We don't charge you for that, but we'll go quickly into the security or the cost pillar, or whatever your particular concern is. We might recommend a full well-architected review, which is a chargeable thing, which takes half a day. It's a really good way of evaluating your current practice against AWS's standards. It's a good way of surfacing information about who in your new team knows where the bodies are buried and who is kind of clueless about it. So we find it's pretty valuable from an orientation perspective. There is AWS funding aligned with this. That means that if you do a review like this, and you go on to engage us to solve some of the problems that are identified, AWS will put some money in the pot to make that a little bit cheaper for you. So definitely worth doing. Probably better to do that than to do it self-service, but you can do a self-service well-architected review if you like as well. There are tools in the console for doing that. As I say, my team's done 700 of them, so we're pretty good at it at this point. The landing zone I mentioned, we do that at a fixed price. So if you want to add a landing zone to your existing AWS estate, we can do that at a fixed cost. That includes getting all that stuff set up and bringing some of your accounts into the new landing zone. But might also include, if you have a really, really sort of rich and extensive estate, that might need a bit more consultancy work to kind of conform everything and make sure that we're not breaking things as they come under that new set of governance. But the landing zone is a good thing to do, and very easy to set up. I think we've done about 60 or 70 of them or something. It's pretty straightforward. We also have access now to, because of our standing as a SaaS partner, we have access to a funding program called SaaS Discovery, where if you are a startup business, which is the main, or rather, if AWS consider you to be a startup business, you can work with us on a platform design or some kind of workshopping around a SaaS solution, and Amazon will pay for that. And we just claim that in cash from Amazon. You get the outcome of that workshop for at no cost to you, essentially. That's a really good way of thinking. If you were thinking about a migration or you're thinking about a modernization activity, like I mentioned before, if you're thinking about building a new application as part of your product estate, it's a really good way of sort of kicking the tires, seeing how that will work, and getting some expertise from my team for no cost, or cost borne by Mr. Bezos, who frankly has enough money. So let's take as much of it as we can. That's my contact details. That QR code again is my LinkedIn tag. If you want to connect on there. We've got a few minutes for questions. If you'd like to fire some questions at me, I'll leave this slide up briefly, and then take it down if there are Q&A to be had. So it's my question: did you learn something today? That's the important thing. Do you now feel armed to go into a new AWS environment and figure out what the hell is going on?
Absolutely, a much better idea where to begin with now, John, because I mean, it's a slightly different from when you're growing through a company and things are kind of moving at a slower pace, and you have kind of a, let's say, a more broader and what's the word I'm looking for? Relaxed outlook, shall we say? But you know, for the way that we're working now, that helps kind of narrow it down with the focus. So yeah, incredibly valuable, incredible. Thanks.
It's very tempting to go into an environment and assume everyone's done everything the way that you would do it, and often that's not true. My face is out of focus. Closer to the camera. What's going on? No, you just don't get focused, me. I'm afraid. There we go. That's better.
No, it's great, John. Thanks.
Just wanted to say thanks, John. Really useful. You know, some definite nuggets in there.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it was really helpful to thought it out in kind of the first 90 days, the checklist to go through and what to look for priority wise.
Cool.
We don't have guard duty running, so nudged it.
Right. Yep, go turn that on. Nice and easy. Quick win, for sure.
John, I was going to ask, you mentioned about the AWS credit.
Yes.
What are the key criteria for meeting that? Because I'm working with one of the founder, and they're literally just starting. They haven't got any funding, and from what I'm reading, they have to be part of a VC funded or some other mechanism. What are some of the key things that AWS would look at before they give you some credit?
Yeah, so AWS will give you some credits regardless of whether you are funded or not. But the Activate program is for funded startups. So they're kind of the thesis, I think, with Activate, and this isn't something that they've actively told me, is what I believe to be the case based on what I've seen, is actually broadly, AWS as a business will take bets on things that other people have shown to be successful or think will be successful. So if their VCs think that you're worth investing in, Amazon will agree and say, "Yep, okay, we understand the thesis of this VC fund, and we will throw some credits in as well." Obviously, $100,000 of credits doesn't cost Amazon $100,000 because they're taking their margin out of that. But that's the approach. So if you look for AWS Activate, Google AWS Activate, you'll find a page about that. I think you can find out from there which funds are part of that program, and if you are not part of a fund, you can at least get $1,000 or something like that, like just a little sweetener. But if you're fully funded, at a sort of seed or A round, there's big credit pot to go for, and that funding has just got more generous as well. I think they've just added another potential 100,000 to it. They're competing with Azure basically, or GCP. That funding is really about sweetening your idea of using them as a platform over and above the competition. And as the competition get a bit more aggressive, they have to kind of respond.
Thank you so much. And like I said, you actually given me the £1,000 worth of slide, the one about the lending zone and everything.
Okay.
That was worth the time I was listening to.
Worth every penny. Excellent. Yes. Glad to hear it. The other thing I should say, actually, just on an AWS being useful note, because we're a SaaS aligned partner, we work with the SaaS teams over at AWS, and there are mechanisms by which AWS can help you sell your product if you are a SaaS product. And they're a little bit obtuse, and there's some hoops to jump through because Amazon loves its hoops. But there's a program called ISV Accelerate. And if you are building a SaaS or an ISV product, you become an AWS partner, you list your product on the AWS marketplace, you have that reviewed and assessed, and you show that you are making sales of that product. You can join this ISV Accelerate program. And once you've made your way through that program, AWS account managers will get a bonus for helping you sell your product. Typically, the types of products that work well that way are security tools, infrastructure components, like the things that look like the things that you would buy from AWS. It's there as an option. So if you're thinking about opening up a new market, or you want to sort of get a sales boost, that might be something to look at. Amazon won't make any promises about the fact that you'll sell anything. I won't make any promises about Amazon's ability to sell anything. It's taken me a decade to get Amazon to sell anything that I do. But we can help you short circuit that in a way.
What was the name of that again, John?
It's called ISV Accelerate. There's a little bit of information on their website about it. I'm really annoyed about the focus of my camera. I'm gonna have to. I think that everything needs cleaning. There we go. Lee, you had a question.
Yeah. So I'm basically built have got to the stage where I've got two platforms that I've been working on. So one on third party, and now I'm looking at building a new SaaS platform on AWS that encompasses what's been built. And I think that makes more sense rather than engaging in middleware and this kind of stuff. So actually, the SaaS discovery piece that you were talking about, I mean, I'm quite long in the tooth as well in this kind of game, but actually I didn't know about that, and I wouldn't want to. But I think it's all really interesting because I'm building this platform that's actually automation for a lot of some of the things that you've spoken about as well, and so it's all very mishmash. So does that still kind of work? Because if it does, I mean, I'd love to. I mean, that's
probably SaaS Discovery is a funding program that is available only through partners who hold the SaaS competency, which we do. So I think there are maybe 3 in the UK, 4, something like that. They trialed it at the end of last year. They ran it at the beginning of this year, but demanded that everybody who went through it had some kind of generative AI focus, which they've now relaxed that requirement. And it is, I think, only for startup and for public sector workloads. But if you incorporate it as a startup, you'll probably be eligible for it. And some of the things that we've done under SaaS Discovery have been sort of it's kind of roadmap building. You're saying, look, here's where you are, here's where you want to be. Here is the AWS way in which you would do this. Here's where we would start, and here are the things you need to do after that. And you can take that away and either build that yourself, or you can hire us to do some of the bits that we found that we can accelerate for you. All of Amazon, the thing to bear in mind about Amazon is that all their funding programs are designed to get you spending more of your own money on the platform. So everything that you do has to demonstrate future revenue. So SaaS Discovery, the criteria is if we can make a case for the outcome of that discovered work increasing your Amazon spend by about, I think it's $10,000 a month, it's 120K ARR, then that's the thesis by which they fund it. If it's actually, this is a serverless product and it's going to generate 50p of revenue for us month by month, they're not going to be that interested. But almost all funding programs by AWS designed to influence one behavior only, and that's doing more, with the exception of well-architected. And the funding for well-architected is designed to help you do a better job, so that you don't screw up and be able to say Amazon made us do that, or this was possible because of AWS. It's a reputational thing, as far as I can tell.
Thanks for that.
Cool. Well, good. Chelsea, back to you.
Well, I just want to say a massive thank you, Jon, for such a valuable presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope everybody sounds like a lot of people took a lot of information away from it. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope that you enjoyed it and learned a lot today. Next week, we have the impact of generative AI on the future of consulting. So I hope to see you guys there. That's on the 2nd of July at 1 o'clock as usual. And Jon, thanks again ever so much. Really interesting presentation.
Sure thing. The impact of generative AI on consulting, as far as I can tell, is going to be all about how do we make this cheaper? How do we make it cheaper and more secure? You should be doing generative AI on AWS, by the way. If you're kicking the tires and that you haven't looked at Bedrock, you absolutely should. I'm on Slack if you want to badger me about any of this. Happy to chat whenever.
Yes, please do connect with Jon on LinkedIn and feel free to carry on the conversation with Jon and each other. Thank you so much.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.